The humid Georgia night wrapped around the fields like a suffocating blanket, thick with insects, the smell of churned soil, and the buzzing heat that made even the shadows sweat. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a whippoorwill called out. Cicadas screamed, and over it all, slicing through the night like a blade, came a woman's scream. Pearl didn't even hear her own voice at first. Shock had turned her body numb, her mind floating somewhere outside herself. 1 second she'd been staring up at 3 men whose faces she had learned to avoid for years, and the next she was on her back, dirt raining into her mouth, her vision a shrinking circle framed by silhouettes she would never forget. Rough hands shoved her down, a boot ground into her shoulder, pushing her deeper into the shallow grave. Someone chuckled. Someone else said, "Hold her still. She ain't going nowhere now." Pearl tried to twist away, but her limbs wouldn't obey. Her dress was torn, her ribs ached with every breath, and her throat burned from screaming until her voice broke into raw sound. She tasted blood. She tasted earth. She tasted the end. The first shovelful of dirt hit her chest with a dull thud. The second landed square across her face. She sputtered, choking, gagging on soil. The third sealed her scream inside her body. Each breath was shorter than the last. Every gasp felt like dragging fire into her lungs. Above her, Silas Crawford, the overseer, grunted as he dug. The Ramsey brothers stood over the grave, their faces lit by the lantern's weak flame. Tucker's lips curved into the familiar crooked grin he wore when drunk. Wade spat into the hole, as though marking territory. They laughed. They joked. They covered her face with earth. Pearl's world became weight, pressure, pain, darkness. As the dirt rose around her, she forced her eyes to stay open, even as grit scraped against her lashes, even as soil pressed into the corners of her mouth. She stared upward at the rings of men's faces until the last sliver of moonlight vanished. She memorized everything. Silas's scarred jawline, Tucker's crooked smile, Wade's nervous left eye that twitched when he lied. She burned those features into the walls of her mind, deeper than any grave could reach. Because if this was to be her end, she would not allow it to be an erasure. She would not disappear. Not silently. Not tonight. The dirt climbed up her sides, crushing her ribs. Her lungs heaved, desperate for space. Her fingers clawed at the soil, nails bending backward, snapping, filling with blood and grit. The sound of shoveling slowed, then stopped. Boots shuffled. A voice muttered, "Good enough." Another said, "Ain't no one finding her." Then laughter drifted away through the trees. Finally, everything grew still. Pearl lay buried beneath the weight of the world. The soil pressed against her chest until breathing became guesswork, tiny sips of air stolen through a pocket she'd created with the last of her strength. Her mind throbbed with panic, her heartbeat loud as a drum inside her skull. She was alone. She was dying. She was supposed to be gone, but she wasn't. Not yet, and she wasn't truly alone. Not entirely. In the woods, a pair of old eyes watched the final mound of dirt settle. Moses had been gathering medicinal roots along the forest edge that evening. The Belmont Plantation's woods were his refuge, a place where white men rarely bothered to follow. A place where he could pretend, for a moment, that he was a man rather than property. He'd noticed Pearl walking with Silas and the Ramsey brothers earlier. Something had felt wrong. 3 white men escorting a young black woman to an abandoned cabin? He knew that pattern. He had seen it too many times. So he followed, hidden by trees older than any plantation, moving carefully through layers of pine needles and moonlight. He heard the screams. He crouched low, hands shaking, chest tightening with helpless fury. He wanted to throw himself between them, but Moses had lived long enough to understand the terrible arithmetic of white violence. 1 man stepping forward meant 2 bodies buried instead of 1. He could not save Pearl then, but he could remember, and so he did. He remembered every sound, every voice, every order barked by Silas. He remembered the laughter. He remembered the smell of spilled whiskey and sweat. And when they dragged Pearl behind the cabin, limp and bloodied, he followed at a distance, terrified of what he'd see and yet unable to look away. When the first shovel of dirt hit her, he had to clamp a hand over his mouth to keep from shouting. His knees buckled beneath him as he watched them bury her like an animal, like trash, like nothing. And when they finally left, Moses stayed hidden until he heard no more footsteps. He crept forward, each movement weighted with dread. He knelt beside the grave. For a long moment, he did nothing, said nothing. He just sat there, trembling, staring at the disturbed soil that hid a woman who had done nothing but exist in a world designed to break her. His heart broke. His rage simmered. His hands shook. He whispered the old prayers. Not the ones taught to please masters, but the ones whispered across ocean crossings, the ones carried from villages long burned or forgotten. Languages heavy with ancestors. Words meant to protect the dead and guide the living. When he finished praying, he placed both palms on the earth. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry, child." Then, the earth moved. Moses recoiled, heart leaping into his throat. The mound trembled. A crack split through the soil. A hand broke through, fingers clawing at the air. "Lord, have mercy," Moses gasped. Then Pearl's other hand emerged, digging furiously. Dirt sprayed as she dragged herself upward with frantic, animal desperation. Moses lunged forward, helping her scrape away the soil, pulling her toward air, toward life, toward a world that had just tried to bury her. Pearl's head surfaced. She gasped, raw, rasping, violent breaths that sounded like a body remembering how to live. Her eyes darted wildly. She coughed up dirt and blood. She staggered to her knees, shaking, heaving, drenched in soil. For a moment she seemed not to recognize anything, not Moses, not the trees, not the sky. Then her gaze sharpened. "They buried me," she croaked, voice like gravel. "I know." Moses steadied her shoulders. "I saw. They violated me," she continued. "Then they buried me." "I know," he said again, voice trembling with equal parts rage and sorrow. Pearl stared straight ahead, mouth trembling, eyes blazing with something Moses had only seen in soldiers during the War of Rebellion, rage sharpened into purpose. "They meant to silence me," she whispered. But I crawled back. She rose to her feet, swaying but standing, her silhouette eerie and powerful in the moonlight. "I'm going to make them see me." Moses swallowed hard. "Pearl, listen to me. You can't go near the house. They'll kill you for real this time." She turned to him slowly. "I already died." There was no argument to give, no reasoning to offer. Moses saw in her eyes something that transcended fear. A woman who had been pushed beyond the threshold where terror held any power. Pearl had looked death in the eye, felt its weight, tasted its dirt, and death had let her slip through its fingers. "What do you do to someone who has nothing left to lose?" He shuddered. "What you planning?" he whispered. Pearl stared in the direction of the Belmont house, its warm light flickering through the distant windows like a taunt. "I'm going to make them speak the truth," she said. "Tonight." Moses breathed in sharply. "Then I'm going with you." Pearl's eyes softened, briefly, like a flicker of the woman she'd been that morning, gentle, tired, human. "Thank you," she whispered. "But first, we need witnesses." That was how it began. Pearl still covered in dirt, ribs aching, skin bruised. Voice frayed, walked back toward the quarters with Moses at her side. Doors opened one by one as she knocked softly, and each face that saw her reacted with shock sharp enough to shake the walls. Dessa was the first to find her voice. "Pearl, goodness, we thought you were," Silas said. "I know what he said," Pearl replied. "And I know what he did." As she told her story, people gathered. Fear rippled through the room. Fear for Pearl. Fear for themselves. Fear for what this could mean. But fear slowly gave way to something else. Resolve. Isaac, barely 17, shook his head as he listened. "If we speak up," he said, voice cracking, "they'll kill us." "I'm not asking you to speak up," Pearl said. "Not yet. I'm asking you to witness, to hear, to remember. When I confront them, I need people who heard the truth with their own ears." "Why?" Dessa whispered. "They won't believe us." "Maybe not," Pearl said. "But the truth doesn't die when enough people remember it." Her voice steadied. "I died tonight. and I clawed my way back. I didn't come back for silence. The room grew still. Then Clara stood. "I'll witness," she said quietly. "My sister died last year on Johnson Plantation. We all know they killed her." Nobody spoke. I won't stay quiet this time. One by one, others stood. 15 witnesses. Behind Pearl now. A small army of truth-bearers. "Thank you," Pearl said softly. "Stay hidden. Listen. And no matter what happens to me, remember everything." The night waned. Dawn approached. Pearl went to wash the soil from her face. She found a dress plain, clean, modest. She tied her hair back. She straightened her spine. By the time she stepped out into the early gray light, she no longer looked like a woman who had been buried. She looked like a woman who had crawled out of her grave to demand the world see her. 15 witnesses followed at a distance, hidden in the mist. Pearl walked straight to the front door of the Belmont house, a door she had never been allowed to touch. She raised her fist, and she knocked. The knock on the Belmont's front door echoed across the porch like a gunshot. Not a gentle tap, not a hesitant gesture. A strike, a demand, a declaration. Pearl stood straight-backed, chin lifted, the early dawn casting long shadows across her face. Her dress clung damp to her skin from the water pump, and her hair was tied neatly, as if she had simply risen early for chores instead of rising from the grave. Behind her, hidden among the hedges, beneath the porch, behind the stables, 15 witnesses crouched in silence, hearts pounding in unison. For generations, enslaved people had learned not to cross certain lines, not to raise their gaze, not to speak unless spoken to, not to approach the front door under any circumstances. That entrance was an altar to white authority. Crossing it uninvited wasn't just forbidden, it was unthinkable. And yet, Pearl knocked again. Harder, inside. Footsteps thudded. Voices whispered. Someone gasped. Finally, the door cracked open, revealing Hattie, the Belmont's senior house servant, a woman well into her 50s with silver hair pulled tight into a bun. Her eyes widened so sharply it looked as though she might faint. "Pearl, child, what are you, Lord have mercy?" Hattie breathed. "We thought you was—" "I know what you thought," Pearl said. "Fetch Master Belmont." Hattie's hands shook. "Pearl, listen to me. You gone lose your life. I already did." Pearl's voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that frightened even Hattie, who'd seen more cruelties than she could count. "Get him," Pearl repeated. "Now." Hattie swallowed, torn between fear of her master and fear of denying a woman who looked like she'd walked out of her own grave. Finally, she nodded and vanished inside. Pearl stood on the porch alone, the boards creaking under her bare feet. The 15 hidden witnesses leaned forward, straining to catch the first words of the confrontation. Moments later, Master Belmont pushed through the doorway. His nightshirt was wrinkled, his hair stuck out at odd angles. His face was flushed from anger at being woken, and from the reality of seeing a woman he had been assured was missing, not murdered, not violated, but conveniently gone, standing on his porch. "What is the meaning of this?" he snapped. "Silas told me you ran off. He said you disappeared into the woods." "He lied," Pearl said sharply. "And I will not let his lies bury me again." Belmont blinked, startled by her tone. An enslaved woman interrupting a white man in his own doorway was an act so unprecedented that even his outrage wavered under confusion. Before he could speak, Pearl raised her voice, steady, fierce, shaking only from exhaustion, not fear. "Your overseer and his friends assaulted me. Then they buried me alive in a shallow grave behind the old cabin. They covered my face with dirt and left me to die." Belmont's jaw dropped. Behind him, Mrs. Belmont appeared in her silk robe, hand at her throat. Their 2 grown sons stumbled into view, their expressions a mix of disgust and fascination. "What nonsense is this?" Belmont sputtered. "How dare you accuse? You want proof?" Pearl cut in. "Ask Silas where he was yesterday afternoon. Ask him why my dress is torn. Ask him why Tucker Ramsey said, 'We buried you,' just now when he saw me." As if summoned by guilt itself, Silas Crawford stepped onto the porch from the side yard. His face froze when he saw her. His skin went gray. "Master," Silas said quickly. "She's lying." She ran off. The woods got her scared. I didn't run," Pearl said. "I was dragged." The Ramsey brothers emerged next, bleary-eyed, hair disheveled from sleep. Tucker stopped dead when his gaze landed on Pearl. "You," he choked. Wade shoved him hard. "Shut up, fool!" But the damage was done. 15 witnesses in the shadows heard it. Neighbors gathering near the property line heard it. Even Master Belmont heard it. "Tucker," Belmont said slowly, voice trembling with realization. "What did you just say?" Tucker's face twisted. "Nothing! She's lying," he insisted, but his voice wavered, betraying him. Pearl stepped forward, eyes locked on him. Tucker flinched. "You said it yourself," she told him. "You buried me." These people heard it. A ripple of murmurs spread across the porch. A few neighbors were riding up the path now, drawn by the early morning uproar. Some carried rifles. Others came out of curiosity. But all wore the pinched, uneasy expressions of people sniffing scandal. Belmont's face went dark. "Silas," he growled. Did something happen yesterday?" Silas swallowed hard. "Master Belmont, sir. She's just trying to stir up trouble. These slaves talk. They make up things. They—" "Answer the question!" Belmont roared, surprising even himself. Silas stiffened. For a moment, no one breathed. Then he said the words that sealed his fate. Things got out of hand. A hiss of shock rolled through the small crowd. Pearl stepped between him and Belmont. "Is that what you call rape?" she asked. "Is that what you call burying a woman alive?" "Watch your mouth," Wade snarled, stepping toward her. Pearl didn't flinch. "Kill me again if you want. Do it right here. In front of your master. In front of your neighbors. In front of your God." Wade froze mid-step, stunned by her fearlessness. "Do it," Pearl repeated. "Bury me again. But this time you won't bury the truth with me." Master Belmont's face twisted, not with moral outrage, but with calculation. He wasn't a man moved by justice. He was moved by reputation. If word of this spread, if a northern journalist printed a story about brutality on his land, his social standing would shatter. His business partners in Savannah would cut ties. He might even face inquiries from abolitionists up north who loved nothing more than painting southern plantations as torture grounds. Pearl saw the exact moment he realized he couldn't silence this. Not with witnesses, not with neighbors listening, not with Silas cracking under pressure, not with Tucker Ramsey's accidental confession. Slowly, Belmont looked at Pearl, then at his wife, then at Silas, then at the Ramsey brothers. Finally, he spoke, voice trembling with forced composure. "This situation needs to be contained." Pearl's lips curved, not a smile, but something sharper. "No, it needs to be heard." And right on cue, footsteps sounded from beyond the porch. Moses emerged from the tree line, breathless, clothes soaked in morning dew. Beside him stood Jonah, the free black man from town, broad-shouldered, jaw set, and behind Jonah, a northern journalist holding a leather-bound notebook. William Thorpe. Belmont blanched. "You," he sputtered. "What are you doing here at this hour?" Thorpe adjusted his spectacles. "I was told," he said calmly, "that something happened here last night I should see for myself." Belmont turned a furious glare on Moses. "You brought him here? You think you can?" "He saw what happened," Moses said with quiet steadiness. "He's seen it all. And I saw what happened after," Jonah added. "I seen her walk out of that grave." Neighbors went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Thorpe stepped toward Pearl. "Miss Pearl," he said gently, "may I hear your story?" Pearl lifted her chin. "You'll hear it, and they'll hear it too." She pointed to the entire gathering. Belmont, Silas, the Ramsays, the neighboring plantation owners, the witnesses hidden in the hedges, everyone. She stepped onto the porch and began to speak, not as a servant, not as a victim, not as property, but as a woman refusing to be erased. She told everything: the cabin, the assault, the burial, the dirt pressing into her lungs, the fight to breathe, the feeling of death closing over her. Moses digging her out. Her decision to walk to the house. Her voice didn't shake. Thorpe wrote furiously, capturing every detail. Silas sweated through his shirt. The Ramsey brothers shifted nervously. Belmont's sons whispered urgently to their mother. When Pearl finished, silence swallowed the yard. Then Thorpe turned to the Ramsey brothers. "I heard a confession earlier," he said. "Would either of you like to repeat it?" Tucker went pale. Wade grabbed his arm. "Don't say another word," he hissed. Belmont glared at Silas. "And you? You told me she ran away." Silas opened his mouth, and for once in his life, no lie came out. He simply hung his head. "Master Belmont," Jonah said quietly, "you can try to hide this, but the truth's already out. Folks heard. Folks seen." 15 witnesses stepped from the shadows, faces grim, eyes locked on Belmont, the overseer, the Ramsey brothers, the neighbors, the journalist. Every single one of them had heard the truth. Belmont knew then that he had lost control, not of his plantation, not of his slaves, but of the narrative. Pearl's voice had split open the day, and there was no stuffing the truth back into the dark. Not ever again. The moment William Thorpe uncapped his ink pen, the air on the Belmont plantation shifted. Not physically, there was still the heavy warmth of a Georgia morning settling across the yard, but spiritually, something cracked open, something long sealed, long silenced, the kind of silence that fed on buried truths. Thorpe flipped open his notebook, his fingers steady, eyes sharp. "Miss Pearl," he said, "I'd like to verify your experience. Every detail matters." Pearl nodded. She felt the weight of every eye on her white, black, guilty, terrified, defiant, hopeful. She had walked into this moment alone, but she no longer stood alone. 15 witnesses stood behind her. Moses, Jonah, even the wind seemed to lean closer. She began again. "My name is Pearl," she said. "And yesterday, Silas Crawford ordered me to carry supplies to the far cabin." She described the walk to the cabin, the heavy heat, the way Tucker Ramsey had blocked the doorway before she even stepped inside. She described the fear in her stomach as she realized the lie she'd been led into. Then she described the attack not for shock, but for truth. Her voice didn't break. She didn't look down. She named what they tried to erase. When she described the burial, even the white men who'd come to watch the commotion shifted uncomfortably. A few cleared their throats. One removed his hat. For the first time, Pearl saw their fear not of her, but of the truth she carried in her scarred, dirt-stained skin. Finally, she reached the moment Moses dug her from the grave. "I woke," she said, "because my story refused to die." Thorpe's pen scraped page after page. When she finished, he looked to Moses next. "Moses," Thorpe asked, "what did you see?" Moses's voice was slow, thick, each syllable weighed down by years he had never been allowed to speak freely. "I seen 3 white men lead her to that cabin. I seen 'em go in. I heard the screams. I saw 'em drag her out. I saw 'em bury her." His voice cracked. "I wanted to stop it. God knows I did. But if I ran out there, there'd have been 2 graves instead of 1. Thorpe nodded, letting the silence sit before asking his next question. "And what happened after?" Moses looked at Pearl, then back to Thorpe. "She climbed out, with her own hands, with the strength God gave her. Ain't never seen nothing like it." A murmur ran through the crowd. Thorpe turned to the witnesses next. One by one, they stepped forward. Clara, Isaac, Dessa, Ruth, young, old, trembling, resolute. They each spoke pieces of Pearl's story, her arrival back at the quarters, the dirt in her hair, the terror in her voice, but the steel in her eyes. Every word layered truth over truth. By the time they finished, Silas and the Ramsey brothers looked like men cornered by a truth sharper than chains. Thorpe finally addressed them directly. "Silas Crawford," he said, "do you deny the accusations made against you?" Silas's voice trembled. "She's lying. She making all this up." Pearl stepped forward. "Then tell us," she said quietly. "Tell us where you were. Tell us why you came back last night and told Master Belmont I ran away. Tell us why Tucker Ramsey said, 'We buried you.'" the moment he saw me. Every eye snapped to Tucker. He opened his mouth, closed it again, swallowed hard. His face flushed beet red. "I didn't mean it like that," Tucker muttered. She trickin' y'all. How could she trick you into admitting what you did?" Clara shot back. Wade grabbed Tucker's arm. "Shut up," he hissed. Thorpe turned to Belmont. "Master Belmont," he said bluntly, "you have heard every testimony. You have heard confessions spoken and attempted. You have a choice: silence or truth." Belmont's face contorted. Sweat beaded at his temples. He looked like a man trapped in a cage made of his own reputation, his own greed, and his own fear. "My reputation is at stake," Belmont muttered, mostly to himself. "If word of this spreads—" "It already has," Jonah said. "We carried it to town. Folks know. More folks going to know. You can't bury it no more." Pearl stepped forward, standing directly before Master Belmont. "You can't protect them," she said, voice calm but cutting. "Not from truth, not from memory." Belmont stared at her. For once, he didn't see property. He didn't see a worker. He didn't even see a threat. He saw a story that would outlive him. He swallowed hard. "Silas," he whispered, "did you commit these acts?" Silas opened his mouth, but before he could lie, Thorpe cut in. "Remember," Thorpe said quietly, "that every word you say is now witnessed." Silas's shoulders slumped. His arrogance, his cruelty, his authority all crumpled like wet parchment. "It got out of hand," he mumbled again. "Got out of hand," Pearl snapped, her voice rising for the first time. "You beat me, violated me, buried me alive. That's what you call out of hand?" Silas stared at his boots. Belmont exhaled shakily. "Then, you leave me no choice." But before he could speak, Tucker shouted desperately, "We didn't mean to kill her. We thought she'd stop screaming." Wade finished, defeated, the words falling out of him like stones. The yard went dead silent. Not one bird, not one insect, not one whisper. The only sound was the scratch of Thorpe's pen capturing the confession. Pearl felt her knees weaken, not from fear, not from relief, but from the surreal enormity of what she'd just witnessed. Men who had believed themselves untouchable, men who had buried her, men who built their whole lives on her silence were now unraveling in front of her. Belmont looked sick. "Silas," he said hoarsely. "Tucker, Wade, you're done here. You leave my property. And you," he pointed at Silas, "are never to set foot on it again." Silas sputtered. "But, sir, that's final." He turned to Thorpe, who stood with impeccable posture, his notebook filled with everything needed to ruin a plantation owner hundreds of miles away. "Mr. Thorpe," Belmont said shakily, "may I speak with you in private?" Thorpe snapped his notebook shut. "No," he said. "You may not." Pearl could have wept. Belmont, pale and sweating, stumbled backward. His wife clutched his arm. His sons looked horrified, not by Pearl's suffering, but by the prospect of social ruin. Pearl stepped down from the porch, her heart pounding, her breath unsteady but strong. "Pearl," Thorpe said, "may I return with you to the quarters? I want to document everything." "Yes," she said, "and everyone else follow." The witnesses, huddled and still trembling, obeyed. For once, they walked tall. They weren't sneaking. They weren't hiding. They were stepping into sunlight with their heads held high. Thorpe spent hours interviewing them. He gathered evidence: Pearl's torn scarf, the broken button Moses had found, the location of the grave. He examined the cabin, documenting the rotting floorboards, the bloodstains on the beams. By noon, he had more than enough. And by sundown, after riding back to town, he sent the first draft of the story north by courier. 2 days later, it appeared in a Charleston abolitionist paper. A week later, it was reprinted in Savannah, Baltimore, Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. The woman they buried alive. A true account of Southern brutality. The South seethed with whispers. The North erupted with outrage. Pearl became a name passed between fire-lit meetings, abolitionist circles, whispered conversations on plantations. Her story was a match, tossed into dry brush. And once the blaze began, no one, not Belmont, not Silas, not any white man could smother it. But on the plantation itself, things turned complex. Pearl couldn't stay. She was a scandal, a symbol, a living reminder of Belmont's failure to control his own men. She was a threat to his business, to his pride, to the fragile architecture of Southern lies. But he couldn't kill her. Too many eyes watched her now. He couldn't sell her. No buyer wanted a woman whose name was printed in newspapers across the country. He couldn't keep her in chains either. Thorpe, Jonah, Moses, the abolitionists, everyone was watching. In the end, Belmont accepted a donation from an abolitionist fund in Philadelphia, an exorbitant amount designed not to compensate him, but to brand him publicly as a man who had sold the freedom of a woman he had nearly let be murdered. The papers signed. Pearl was free. So were Moses and Dessa, purchased by the same fund. Together, the three boarded a train heading north. The world flickered by through the windows: pine forests, cotton fields, rivers, towns, each one a place Pearl had once believed she would die near. Now they slid away behind her. Pearl was quiet during the journey, staring at the passing landscape. Moses dozed. Dessa cried softly into her hands. Finally, Pearl spoke. "We're really leaving," she whispered. "You are," Moses said. "Because you lived." Pearl nodded. "Because I was meant to speak." In Philadelphia, Pearl found a world she had never imagined. Cold winters, stone buildings, churches filled with people who wanted to hear her story, abolitionists who treated her with dignity, writers who quoted her words, crowds who wept when she spoke. On stage, she recounted the soil, the grave, the darkness, the truth. She told it again and again until her voice grew hoarse and her spirit, though scarred, grew strong. She spoke at rallies, churches, meetings, schools. She testified before lawmakers. She wrote letters to newspapers. She met scholars who documented her story in books. Years passed. Wade Ramsey fled west. Tucker died in a drunken brawl. Silas drifted from plantation to plantation until the Civil War broke him. Belmont lost everything after emancipation, ruined by scandal and the collapse of slavery. But Pearl lived. Her voice lived. Her story lived. Decades later, as an elderly woman with snow-white hair and a cane, Pearl stood before a classroom of students. "Miss Pearl," a girl asked, "were you scared?" Pearl smiled gently. "Terrified. But I learned something in that grave. When you stop fearing death, you become someone powerful." A boy raised his hand. "Did you ever forgive them?" Pearl paused. "For my own peace," she said. "Not for theirs. But forgiveness never meant forgetting. I carried the truth so no one else could bury it." The children stared at her, wide-eyed, absorbing every word. Pearl leaned on her cane and said, "I clawed my way out of the ground once, and I've been speaking ever since. Because truth is the only thing stronger than the people who fear it." Pearl died in 1897, at age 73, in her sleep, peacefully. Her gravestone read, "Pearl Survivor, Witness, Truth Teller." But her real monument was the story itself, the story that made them tremble, the truth they could never bury, the voice that refused to stay underground.